The toymaker of Ember Hollow. Snow fell over Ember Hollow in a hush so complete it seemed the world itself had paused to listen. The village lay cradled between the black shoulders of the mountain range, its rooftops sloping low and practical, built to survive winters that could freeze breath in a man's lungs. Chimneys smoked lazily, carrying the scent of coal and pine into the iron-gray sky. It was not a place where legends were born. It was a place where people endured. And at the very edge of it, where the forest pressed close and the trees leaned like silent witnesses, stood a crooked little workshop with amber light glowing from its windows. Inside, Aldrin Voss bent over a cluttered table, spectacles perched precariously on the bridge of his narrow nose. He was a thin man in his late 40s, though hard winters had etched deeper lines around his eyes. His fingers were long and scarred, not from battle but from splinters, tools, and years of patient work. A cracked porcelain doll lay before him. One eye hung loose, its painted smile chipped and faded. "Well," Aldrin murmured softly, adjusting a tiny screwdriver, "we can't have you staring at the ceiling all your life, can we?" His voice was steady and warm, never loud, never hurried. It filled the workshop the way lamplight filled corners, gentle, unwavering. Around him, shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten childhoods, wooden horses with chipped paint, tin soldiers missing arms, rag dolls whose seams had surrendered to time, clockwork birds whose wings no longer remembered how to rise. Most toy shops sold new wonders. Aldrin repaired old ones. He believed in mendings. Outside, wind sighed against the shutters. Snow tapped lightly at the glass. He finished setting the doll's eye and gave it a careful polish. When he pressed the hidden spring at its back, the doll blinked twice, its smile no longer crooked but hopeful. "There," he said quietly, "as good as the day you first frightened someone." He placed it aside and reached for the next patient, a wooden knight whose sword had snapped cleanly at the hilt. That was when the knock came. It wasn't a proper knock. It was a scrape, a dragging sound against the door. Aldrin froze. Ember Hollow did not receive visitors after dusk in winter. Wolves prowled the woods beyond. Occasionally, desperate travelers stumbled through, but they knocked like men, firm, hurried, afraid. This sound was hesitant. Another scrape followed, then a faint thud. Aldrin set down his tools slowly. He stood, wiping glue from his fingertips onto a cloth and crossed the workshop floor. The latch felt colder than usual. "Now then," he muttered to himself, "let's see what's decided to misplace itself tonight." He opened the doors. Cold air rushed in like a living thing, sharp and biting. Snow swirled in pale spirals. At first he saw nothing. Then something shifted near the woodpile. Small, curled, shivering. Aldrin blinked. It was no larger than a hunting dog, though its body was sleeker, more elongated. Scales glimmered faintly beneath a dusting of snow, each one catching what little light escaped the doorway. Not dull brown, not gray. Copper, burnished copper. Two golden eyes peered up at him. A dragon hatchling. For a long moment, neither moved. Aldrin's mind supplied every story he had ever heard. Dragons were ruin incarnate, firestorms given wing. In ancient days, they had reduced cities to ash and kings to cinders. They hoarded gold and crushed armies beneath their claws. But this one trembled. And in its foreclaws, clutched awkwardly against its chest, was a blackened bundle of fabric. The hatchling gave a small, uncertain chirr. Not a roar. A chirr. Aldrin's breath misted in the air between them. "Well," he said at last, voice low and steady despite the hammering of his heart, "you're not much of a conqueror, are you?" The hatchling tilted its head. Slowly, so very slowly, it extended one claw and nudged the charred bundle toward him. Aldrin stepped forward. The snow crunched under his boots, the cold bit through his coat. He crouched. The bundle resolved into something heartbreakingly ordinary, a stuffed rabbit once white perhaps, now gray with soot. One ear was nearly burned away. The stitching along its side had split, spilling blackened stuffing. Aldrin looked from the toy to the hatchling. "You want this fixed?" The dragon blinked once. Its tail twitched anxiously in the snow. Aldrin reached out. The hatchling flinched, not aggressively but reflexively, wings twitching as if preparing to flee. He stopped his hand midair. "I won't hurt you," he said simply. His voice held no grand promise, no oath sworn by blade or blood, just quiet certainty. After a heartbeat, the hatchling stilled. Aldrin gently took the rabbit. The fabric was warm. Not from the cold. from the creature holding it. He rose slowly and stepped backward toward the workshop door. "Well, you'd better come inside," he said over his shoulder. "Can't mend a thing properly while it's freezing." The hatchling hesitated. The wind gusted, scattering snow in sharp whorls. After a moment, it scrambled to its feet and followed him. Inside, warmth embraced them both. The workshop smelled of pine shavings, oil, and old cotton. Lamplight flickered gold against the dragon's scales, revealing subtle variations, flecks of crimson near the spine, faint lines like molten rivers tracing its flanks. Up close, Aldrin could see more clearly. One wing drooped awkwardly. The membrane near its shoulder was torn. Not freshly, but not healed properly either. "You've had a rough season," he murmured. The hatchling shuffled uncertainly on the wooden floor, claws clicking softly. Its tail knocked against a stack of toy blocks, sending them clattering. It startled violently at the sound, wings flaring. "It's only wood," Aldrin assured, already kneeling at his work table. "None of it bites." The dragon lowered itself cautiously onto its belly, golden gaze fixed on the rabbit in Aldrin's hands. He examined the damage. "Burned superficial," he muttered. "Lost most of the stuffing, ear will need reinforcement." He glanced at the hatchling. "Did you set this on fire yourself?" The dragon made a small, embarrassed huff. A faint wisp of smoke curled from its nostrils. Aldrin chuckled softly. "Ah, still learning." He set to work. His hands moved with practiced precision, needle flashing in lamplight, thread sliding through fabric with a soft hiss. He replaced the burnt stuffing with fresh cotton, firm but gentle. He stitched the torn seam with small, careful movements, ensuring strength without stiffness. The hatchling crept closer. Its nose hovered inches from his fingers. At one point, it let out a curious trill and tapped the needle with a claw. "Careful," Aldrin warned lightly, sharp. He reached for a scrap of red cloth from his supply drawer. "No sense pretending it was never burned," he murmured. "Scars are honest things." He cut a small flame-shaped patch and embroidered it over the rabbit's mended seam. A quiet tribute. When he finished, he held the toy up. The rabbit looked imperfect, but whole. "There," he said, offering it back. The hatchling took it carefully, so carefully that its claws barely grazed the fabric. It inspected the stitching, turning the toy over in its grasp. Then, in a movement so sudden Aldrin nearly dropped his spectacles, the dragon pressed its forehead against his hand. "Warm, solid, trusting." Aldrin stilled. He had repaired hundreds, thousands of toys. None had ever thanked him. He swallowed. "Well," he said softly, "you're welcome." The hatchling curled around the rabbit and settled by the hearth. Within minutes, it was asleep. Aldrin watched it for a long time. The steady rise and fall of its sides, the faint glow pulsing beneath its scales like banked embers. He noticed the wing again. The tear was poorly healed, edges uneven. He fetched salve meant for farm dogs and carefully approached. The dragon stirred as he touched the injured membrane, but did not wake. His hands were gentle. He applied the salve and wrapped the wing lightly with clean cloth strips. "There now," he murmured, "we'll see about fixing that too." Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, for the first time in many years, Aldrin Voss did not feel quite so alone. The hatchling was gone by morning. No shattered door. No scorch marks. Just faint claw prints in sawdust near the hearth. And on the work table, a single copper scale no larger than a coin. Aldrin turned it over thoughtfully. He placed it in a small wooden box beneath his bench. "Payment accepted," he murmured. He did not expect to see the creature again. Dragons, even small ones, did not linger among humans. Yet that evening, just as lamplight bloomed against the gathering dark, there came another scrape at the door. Aldrin smiled before he opened it. Snow-dusted copper scales once more. This time, the hatchling carried something different. A bent tin knight. Its sword arm hung loose, its painted shield bore the mark of heat. The dragon looked up at him expectantly. Aldrin stepped aside. "Come in," he said, as though this were the most ordinary arrangement in the world. And so began the strangest winter Ember Hollow would never know it had survived. The fire beneath the mountains. Winter did not leave Ember Hollow gently. It clung. It resisted. It scraped its icy fingers down chimney stones and pressed frost into window corners as if unwilling to surrender its hold on the valley. But even the harshest winters eventually yield to time, and when the first thaw crept down from the mountain peaks, something else stirred with it. Something older. Something watching. Inside the crooked workshop at the village's edge, Aldrin Voss adjusted a brace of carved ashwood beneath a growing dragon's wing. "Hold still," he murmured. Ember, no longer small enough to fit inside a coal basket, grumbled softly but obeyed. She now stretched nearly the length of his workbench from snout to tail tip. Her copper scales had deepened into rich hues of bronze and molten gold, catching firelight in restless gleams. Her injured wing had improved under months of care, but the membrane still pulled unevenly during flight. Aldrin tightened the strap gently. "This isn't a cage," he assured her, fingers steady, "just a reminder." She turned her head, one golden eye narrowing skeptically. He chuckled. Yes, you're very fierce. The trees tremble, the clouds part." Ember huffed, releasing a faint puff of smoke that curled toward the rafters. Outside, snowmelt trickled in thin streams through the village lanes. Children shouted somewhere near the well, their boots splashing in slush. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm. But inside the workshop, nothing about life felt ordinary anymore. Ember had grown accustomed to visiting each evening. At first she had arrived only after dark, cautious and silent. Now she came before sunset, sometimes bursting through the door with careless enthusiasm that rattled every tool on the walls. She brought treasures still, broken trinkets scavenged from the forest, scraps of metal from forgotten mining trails, even once an old locket she had found near a fallen oak. But she brought other things too. Curiosity, questions, and something Aldrin had not expected from a dragon. Gentleness. She never crushed what she held, never tore what she examined. When he repaired something, she watched with absolute focus, as if memorizing each motion of thread and needle, each twist of wire. Once she had tried stitching a torn cloth herself. The result had been uneven and crooked, but careful. Aldrin had not laughed. He had shown her again. Now, as he finished securing the brace, he stepped back and adjusted his spectacles. Try. Ember spread her wings cautiously. The left extended wide and strong. The right, once drooping, followed more evenly than before. She gave a testing flap. Dust swirled. Wood shuddered. A stack of wooden blocks collapsed. She froze mid-motion, eyes wide. Aldrin waved a dismissive hand. They've fallen worse. She lowered her wings slowly. Then she tried again, harder. This time she lifted. Only a foot off the ground. But both wings held. She hovered there, startled and proud all at once. Aldrin smiled. That's it. She gave a triumphant chirr and promptly lost balance, tumbling into a shelf of tin soldiers. The crash echoed. Silence followed. Ember peeked out from the wreckage. Aldrin raised a brow. She emitted a sheepish trill. Pick them up, he said mildly. She did. One by ones. Very carefully. Spring brought green shoots to the valley and whispers to the tavern. Hunters reported strange shapes crossing the upper ridgelines at dawn. Shepherds swore shadows circled their flocks, but never descended. Old Harkin, who claimed to have seen dragons in his grandfather's time, spat into his ale and muttered that mountains remembered things long after men forgot. Aldrin listened without comment. He never spoke of Ember, and she never approached the village during daylight. But she began to linger on the roof of his workshop at night, staring toward the eastern peaks. Watching, her posture changed in those moments. Less playful, more alert. One evening, as Aldrin polished the mended surface of a music box, Ember stiffened mid-stretch. The faint ticking of gears seemed suddenly too loud. What is it? He asked quietly. She did not answer with sound. Instead, she stepped outside. Aldrin followed. The sky burned orange with the last breath of sunset. And against that light, shapes moved. Far, distant, but unmistakable. Wings. Not ones. Many. Aldrin's chest tightened. They flew high, skimming cloud edges, silhouettes vast and ancient. They did not descend. They did not roar. They simply circled once and vanished beyond the mountain spine. Ember stood rigid beside him. Her tail lashed slowly. He rested a hand against her foreleg. "Friends?" he asked softly. She did not look at him. Her eyes tracked the horizon long after the sky darkened. They came 3 nights later. The mountain trembled first. Tools rattled violently against workshop walls. Glass chimed, the hearth's coals leapt. Ember jerked upright from where she had been dozing near the fire. Her pupils narrowed to slits. The tremor deepened, less like an earthquake and more like something immense settling its weight against stone. Aldrin stepped outside into the cold night air. The village had already begun to stir in confusion. Doors creaked open, lanterns flickered to life. And then, the sky split. A roar unlike any storm rolled across the valley. Clouds churned violently as shapes descended through them, massive, terrible, magnificent. Dragons. Dozens. Their scales reflected moonlight in flashes of obsidian, sapphire, emerald, crimson. Wings stretched wider than barns. Claws like scythes gleamed as they circled the mountain peaks. Children screamed. Men grabbed pitchforks uselessly. But the dragons did not dive. They formed a pattern in the sky, precise, deliberate. A formation. At their center descended one larger than the rest. Silver, scarred, ancient. When he landed upon the eastern ridge beyond the village, the ground convulsed. Stone shattered beneath his weight. Snow vaporized in an instant. Ember stepped forward into the open field beyond the workshop. She did not hide. She did not retreat. Aldrin felt fear then, true and visceral, not for himself. For her. The silver dragon lowered his immense head. His eyes burned like twin stars in a weathered face lined with battle scars. When he spoke, his voice rolled through the valley like thunder trapped in a cavern. Sarathiel. The name echoed. Villagers fell silent. Ember's wings trembled faintly. The silver dragon's gaze softened just slightly. Princess of the First Flame. Aldrin blinked. Princess. The dragons above shifted formation, tightening their circle. The silver dragon's eyes moved, slowly, toward the small human standing beside the copper hatchling. "And you," he rumbled. The weight of that gaze was staggering. Aldrin felt as though the mountain itself had chosen to examine him. "You are the menders." Aldrin swallowed. "I repair toys." A pause. The air crackled faintly with restrained heat. "You repaired the heir to the ashen crowns." Silence swallowed the valley whole. Ember glanced back at Aldrin's. In her claws she held something small. The stuffed rabbit. Its flame-shaped patch caught moonlight. The silver dragon's nostrils flared gently. "She carries it always." Aldrin said nothing. He could not. The silver dragon lowered himself further, wings folding with measured control. "Long ago," he continued, "our enemies struck at our future. The royal clutch was shattered in flame and betrayal. We believed the final egg destroyed." His gaze returned to Ember. But fire does not yield so easily. Ember stepped closer to Aldrin. Her shoulder brushed his side. Protective, not fearful. The silver dragon's head dipped lower still, until his eyes aligned nearly with Aldrin's height. "You sheltered her." It was not accusation. It was assessment. "She had a torn wing," Aldrin replied quietly, "and poor stitching." For a heartbeat, the wind itself seemed to pause. Then something extraordinary happened. The silver dragon bowed. Deeply. Behind him, the circling dragons descended in widening arcs, landing along the mountainside in a cascading display of power, and one by one they lowered their heads. Not in submission. In respect. The village watched in stunned silence. The silver dragon spoke again. "I am Varith, last sovereign of the Ashen Crown." His voice carried both authority and weariness. "We searched across continents for the lost flame. It was hidden, wounded, alone." His eyes flicked to the banded brace still secured beneath Ember's wing. "Until it found hands that mend." Ember looked between them. Confusion and something deeper flickered in her gaze. Aldrin placed his palm against her scales. "You don't belong in a toy shop," he said softly. She made a low sound, not quite protest, not quite acceptance. Vareth extended one immense claw toward her. Come, Sarathiel. The name lingered in the air like prophecy. Ember hesitated. Her gaze remained on Aldrin's. He forced a small smile. You've outgrown my shelves. She stepped forward, stopped, turned back, and gently, so very gently, placed the stuffed rabbit at Aldrin's feet. A gift, or a promise. He bent and picked it up. No, he said quietly, returning it to her claws. That's yours. She studied him. Then with visible reluctance, she folded her wings and leapt. Her ascent shook the valley. Air thundered as she rose to join the formation above. The dragons shifted, opening space for her at their center. Vareth unfurled his massive wings. The mountain calls its queen, he declared. And with that, the sky ignited with motion. They climbed in spiraling ascent toward the eastern peaks. Flames streaked briefly against the clouds, not destructive but ceremonial. Aldrin stood in the open field long after they vanished. Snow began to fall again, light and uncertain. Behind him, villagers whispered in awe. But he heard none of it. Only the fatting echo of wings. The mountain did not sleep that night. From deep within its ancient heart, a glow pulsed against the sky, faint at first, then growing. Not wildfires. Not destruction. A beacon. High within the volcanic spires beyond human reach, dragons gathered around a chamber carved in ages past. Ember Sarathiel stood at its center. She felt the weight of memory pressing against her scales. Stone beneath her feet radiated warmth older than language. Vareth approached, slower now, reverent. You were hidden to survive, he said. She looked down at the stuffed rabbit clutched in her claws. I was not alone, she answered. Her voice, still young, still finding its strength, carried through the chamber. Vareth inclined his head. No, he agreed, you were not. Far below, in a small crooked workshop at the edge of Ember Hollow, Aldrin Voss returned to his bench. The shelves felt emptier. The air quieter. He picked up the bent tin knight Ember had brought weeks ago. Its sword arm still needed fastening. He adjusted his spectacles and began to mend. Above, the mountain burned softly, not in wrath, but in awakenings. The queen who remembered. The mountain did not quiet after that night. It awakened. For generations, the eastern peaks beyond Ember Hollow had stood in brooding silence, dark ridges crowned in snow, their volcanic heart long thought dormant. But in the weeks after the dragon's return, a faint crimson glow began to pulse beneath the stone. It did not spill outward in destruction. It did not rain ash upon the valley. It breathed, like a great furnace coaxed back to life. The villagers watched from their fields with wary awe. No armies came, no flocks vanished in flame. Instead, shapes could be seen at dawn and dusk, vast wings gliding between ridgelines, silhouettes cutting across the sun. They did not descend. They observed. And Ember Hollow endured. Aldrin Voss returned to his routines because routines were anchors, and he had always trusted anchors more than storms. He woke before sunrise. He boiled tea in the small iron kettle whose handle had been repaired 3 times. He swept the workshop floor of sawdust and stray cotton stuffing. He placed his spectacles upon his nose and set his hands to work. The first weeks after Sarathiel's departure were the hardest. The hearth felt larger, colder. No copper tail swept tools from shelves. No curious golden eyes followed the careful dance of needle and thread. No accidental scorch marks appeared where an enthusiastic puff of flame had gone slightly astray. The silence was not empty, but it was different. He caught himself glancing at the door at dusk, listening for the familiar scrape. It did not come. Instead, rumors arrived. Travelers passing through the hollow spoke of a dragon court forming in the eastern mountains, of an ancient capital carved into the volcanic spires, long buried beneath ice and time, now blazing with renewed life, of dragons gathering not to wage war but to rebuild. Aldrin listened quietly as he polished the brass gears of a music box. He did not offer his connection to the tale. He did not speak her name. At night, when the wind shifted eastward, he sometimes thought he heard distant echoes, roars layered not in rage but in chorus. He would stand outside beneath the stars, coat wrapped tight around his narrow frame, and stare toward the peaks. Doing well, I hoped, he would murmur. The mountain glow would pulse faintly in answer. High within the volcanic crown of the reborn dragon capital, Sarathiel stood before the pyre throne. The chamber was vast beyond mortal proportion, pillars of obsidian veined with molten light rising like the ribs of some colossal beast. Lava flowed in contained channels beneath crystal bridges, casting shifting reflections across walls etched with ancient runes. Dragons filled the hall. Massive forms of every hue and lineage, emerald-scaled sky hunters, basalt-winged warlords, pale silver scholars whose horns curved like crescent moons. They watched her with reverence and expectation. Vareth the Unyielding stood at her side, though age weighed upon him more heavily now. The years of searching had carved fatigue into his bones. "You are the last of the first flame," he rumbled gently. Sarathiel's wings flexed. "I am not the last," she replied. She thought of a small workshop glowing amber in winter snow, of hands that stitched without trembling, of a human who had not seen a weapon when he looked at her, but a child with a torn wing. Vareth's ancient eyes softened. "No," he conceded, "you are not." A ceremonial brazier was lit at the chamber's center. Its flames rose gold rather than red, rare, sacred. Sarathiel stepped forward. As she approached, the fire responded, not recoiling, not consuming, but rising to meet her. It curled around her claws like an old companion greeting its sovereign. She placed one talon into the blaze. The chamber fell silent. Fire climbed her forelegs, spiraled across her chest, and flared between her horns. It did not burn. It crowned. The runes carved into the chamber walls ignited in cascading brilliance. A single word reverberated in the ancient tongue of dragonkind. Radiant. When the flames settled, she stood taller. Not merely in size, but in presence. Sarathiel the Radiant, queen of all flights. The dragons bowed as one. But as they lowered their heads, Sarathiel's thoughts were not of dominion. They were of a rabbit with a flame stitched over its heart. Rule did not come gently. There were disputes among ancient houses, old rivalries forged in eras when dragons had been divided by pride and territory. There were arguments about borders, about human settlements creeping ever closer to mountain ranges, about whether strength should once again assert itself over the lesser races. Sarathiel listened. She did not roar. She did not threaten. When voices rose, she allowed them to exhaust themselves against her composure. And when she spoke, she did so with calm certainty. "Power without purpose devours itself," she said during one heated council. A crimson warlord snapped his wings irritably. "We were feared once, we were obeyed." Sarathiel regarded him steadily. "And what did that earn us?" Silence followed. She stepped closer to the great map etched into the volcanic floor, lands marked by old scorch scars and faded sigils. "We are not diminished by restraint," she continued. "We are defined by it." Vareth watched with quiet pride. The court began to shift. Slowly, dragons who had once argued for conquest began instead to propose alliances. Patrols were organized, not to terrorize, but to guard trade routes from bandits. Ancient knowledge long hoarded was offered in careful exchanges with human scholars brave enough to approach the mountain's lower slopes. Under Sarathiel's rule, the mountain became not a symbol of dread, but of watchful strength. And in the deepest chamber of her treasury, amid relics older than empires, she placed two simple objects upon a raised stone dais. A stuffed rabbit and a bent tin knight with a newly fastened sword arm. No dragon questioned it. Years turned like gears in a clockwork heart. Ember Hollow prospered. Crops grew fuller, winters softened. Travelers spoke openly of the Golden Guardian whose shadow sometimes passed over the valley during storms. Children played in fields without fear. Aldrin grew older. His hair silvered at the temples, then entirely. His hands, once steady without effort, now trembled slightly when holding delicate porcelain. He adjusted his spectacles more often. But he continued to mend. He repaired a wooden train for a boy whose father had not returned from distant trade routes. He stitched a doll for a girl whose laughter echoed too loudly in an empty house. He fixed cracked music boxes whose melodies had once lulled entire generations to sleep. Sometimes, as dusk settled, he would pause mid-task. He would feel it before he heard it. A pressure in the air. A warmth carried on wind. He would step outside. High above, beyond the drifting clouds, a flash of gold. Not always. But often enough, he never waved. He never called out. He simply nodded, and the shadow would circle once before vanishing eastward. The first true test of Sarathiel's reign came not from within, but from beyond the sea. A radical human faction calling themselves the Iron Covenant rose in the Western Kingdoms. Descendants of lands scorched in ancient dragon wars, they carried inherited hatred like heirlooms. To them, dragon restraint was weakness, and weakness invited eradication. They assembled ships armed with experimental ballistae tipped in alchemical frost. They hired mages who specialized in containment wards and anti-dragon sigils. Their fleet sailed under banners depicting a broken wing. When word reached the mountain, the court erupted in fury. "They dare," snarled one obsidian general. "Let us reduce their ports to cinders," another growled. Sarathiel remained still. Her gaze turned inward for a long moment. Then she spoke. "We will not strike first." A rumble of protest rippled through the chamber. "They come armed for slaughter," Vareth warned quietly. "And we will meet them," she replied, "but not as monsters." She ascended from the volcanic spires at dawn, accompanied by a small formation, no more than a dozen dragons of varying size and strength. The Iron Covenant fleet reached the eastern coast by midday. Sails snapped in harsh wind. Weapons primed. They did not expect the sky to darken with golden wings before they even sighted land. Sarathiel descended alone. She did not unleash flame. She did not roar. She landed upon the lead ship's bow with controlled precision, claws denting but not destroying. Men screamed. Weapons aimed. Mages began incantations. She lowered her immense head until her eyes met those of the fleet commander, a man hardened by bitterness and inherited rage. "I know why you come," she said. Her voice carried over crashing waves, deep and resonant, but steady. "You remember fires." The commander's jaw clenched. "You destroyed us." "Long ago," she acknowledged, "and we were wrong." The words stunned more than any roar could have. She stepped back slightly, creating space. "We do not seek dominion, we seek balance." Ballistae trembled in uncertain hands. "You expect us to trust you," the commander spat. Sarathiel's gaze did not waver. "No," she said quietly, "I expect you to judge us by what we do now." Behind her, the rest of her formation held position in silent readiness. She could have incinerated the fleet in seconds. She did not. After a long, fragile silence, the commander slowly lowered his raised hand. Weapons followed. The Iron Covenant withdrew, not conquered, not humiliated, but uncertain. It was enough. News spread quickly of a dragon queen who had chosen words over wildfire. Respect began to take root where fear once thrived. Winter returned to Ember Hollow the year Aldrin turned 70. Snow fell thick and heavy, blanketing rooftops in white silence. Inside the workshop, the hearth crackled faithfully. Aldrin sat in his worn chair, spectacles sliding low on his nose, a small wooden horse resting in his lap. Its wheel had cracked clean through. He worked slower now, but no less carefully. The door rattled suddenly. Not a scrape, not a hesitant tap. A rush of displaced air and the deep tremor of something vast settling beyond the threshold. Aldrin did not startle. He set the horse gently aside. "Well," he murmured, "about times." The workshop roof lifted. Not torn. Lifted. Massive golden claws curved around its edges with impossible gentleness, removing the structure as one might lift a lid from a music box. Cold air rushed in, but so did warmth. Sarathiel descended into the clearing beyond his home. She filled the open space entirely. Her scales shone like living sunlight against snow. Horns arced back elegantly, adorned with faint filaments of flame that flickered without consuming. She was enormous now, majestic beyond mortal measure. And yet, when she lowered her head, her golden eyes held the same warmth they had the night she first pressed her forehead to his hand. "Aldrin Voss," she said, voice resonating through the valley. Villagers emerged cautiously from their homes, but none ran. They knew. He stepped outside, leaning slightly on his cane. "Well," he said, peering up, "you've grown." A soft rumble, almost laughter, vibrated through her chest. I had good guidance. She lowered herself further. The movement was not commanded. It was chosen. Behind her, dragons of every color descended in widening arcs, landing along the valley's edge. A silent honor guard. Sarathiel bowed. Deeply. The queen of all flights bowed before a toymaker. Gasps rippled through Ember Hollow. Aldrin blinked behind his spectacles. You'll catch cold, he muttered because habit overruled awe. She extended one immense claw toward him. Resting upon it were two objects. The stuffed rabbit and the tin knight, both carefully preserved. He stared at them. You kept them. I keep what matters. He felt his throat tighten. Why come now, he asked quietly. Her gaze softened further. To thank you properly. Snow swirled gently around them. You repaired more than toys, she continued. You taught a creature born of fire how to be gentle. He shook his head faintly. I only treated you as I would any child. She leaned closer, breath warm against his weathered face. And that is why I rule as I do. Behind her, the assembled dragons lowered their heads once more, not commanded but inspired. Aldrin looked at them, then at her. Well, he said after a long moment, voice unsteady but firm, if you're going to lead them all, you'd best remember to mend what breaks. A flicker of flame danced between her horns. I will. She lifted him carefully, so carefully, onto the broad curve of her foreclaw. Gasps rose from villagers, but he did not resist. She raised him gently until they were eye to eye. Will you come, she asked, to the mountain to see what you helped build? He considered. The valley he had known all his life. The workshop, the shelves, the hearth. Then he smiled faintly. I suppose I've repaired enough toys for one lifetime. She spread her wings. The gathered dragons leapt skyward in cascading ascent. And as Sarathiel rose from Ember Hollow with the old toymaker cradled safely in her grasp, the village did not see a monster carrying off a man. They saw a queen honoring her teacher. High above the snow-covered valley, Aldrin looked down at the world he had quietly shaped. You did well, he murmured. Sarathiel's wings beat steady and sure. I learned from the best. And together they flew toward a mountain no longer dark, but radiant. Not ruled by fear, but guided by a mender of broken things. And a dragon who never forgot.